In business today, three things to know. First, it's economic potpourri, unemployment, home sales, and a lot more on the calendar for the week ahead. What to expect and what impact the numbers will have on decisions by the Fed. Then, Russian roulette. Is President Vladimir Putin in danger of losing key support among Russian oligarchs? In Russia, crony capitalism may trump nationalistic politics. And tired of the 5-day work week? One of the richest men in the world says we would get more things done if we just worked 3 days a week. Sounds good to us. Arise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Get out your calculator, your spreadsheets, and your abacus, because this is one of the busiest weeks for economic data all summer, and it will foretell what might happen with the economy, interest rates, and maybe the stock market. We will get unemployment numbers, a first read of the gross domestic product for the second quarter, consumer confidence, home prices, personal income, consumer spending, and the monthly statement from the U.S. Federal Reserve. But we will start the week with some concern about the housing market. After 3 months of strong gains, sales of previously owned homes declined in June, according to the National Association of Realtors. That follows 3 months of gains and surprised analysts who had expected a slightly better showing. Home sales fell in the Northeast and the South, but did gain in the Midwest and the West. And we'll talk economic numbers in a moment with Peter Cardillo. A lot to get through there. But first, that report and some other weakness initially pushed stocks lower earlier in the day, but then the markets rebounded. Here are the final numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed 2202. That's about an 80-point swing to 16,982. The S&P 500 up a fraction, and the Nasdaq pulling back 465. Taking a look at some of the stocks we're watching today. Global nutrition company Herbalife reporting earnings today. Analyst estimates its second quarter revenue had come in. We don't actually have those numbers, but its stock did climb $1.29 to $67.35. Herbalife, of course, has been under assault by hedge fund activist Bill Ackman, who has been a short seller in the stock and says the whole company is a Ponzi scheme. Apple is in the final stages of a deal to acquire talk radio and podcast app Swell Radio. Swell, which has been called the Pandora for talk radio, is reportedly valued at $30 million. Apple closing up $1.35 to $99.02, nearing that $100 mark. Tyson Foods said it reached an agreement to sell its poultry business in Mexico and Brazil. The company says the deal, valued at $575 million, will be paid in cash and completed at the end of the year. Tyson closing at $40.56. And a look at commodities. Gold closing up $1.80 and oil pulling back 50 cents. As mentioned, a lot of economic news on the menu for the week. Peter Cardillo is the chief market economist with Rockwell Global Capital. And Peter joins us. Welcome back to Arise Exchange, Peter. So with all these numbers at the end of the week, what does the economy look like?
I think the numbers are going to tell us just the true fact that the economy is doing well, certainly rebounding from the negative economic activity that we saw in the first quarter. And we think that probably we're going to look at a 2.7% gross domestic product Q2.
So not quite 3%, which some economists have been saying.
Actually, I lowered my forecast a bit. I was looking for 3.25%, but due to the weakness in certain sectors of the economy, we
Where do you see
decided,
that weakness?
Well, for one thing, the housing market, and we saw that today with pending home sales, which surprisingly came down much lower than we were looking for. And as a result of that, I think it shows an uneven growth pattern within the housing market. And, housing is key. And, of course, there are other sectors that are doing quite nicely.
With housing, do you think in the Northeast that prices have maybe gotten a little bit ahead of themselves since we're not seeing any sort of real wage growth?
Well, I think when you talk about triple figures for homes being sold in Brooklyn and in Queens and in Staten Island and in the Bronx, obviously you know that people are paying top dollar. And the real problem is the income of many of these homes certainly are not keeping up with the prices that are being paid for. So there's that disparity. And when that happens, you generally see prices come down a bit. That doesn't mean that, that there isn't demand for housing, or that will collapse. But I think it just means that prices need to come in a bit so that they can equalize in terms of income versus value.
The housing number certainly is one thing the Fed will look at. They're going to meet this week. There's an interesting op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal from the president of the Dallas Fed, who says that he's concerned that the Fed has been too loose for too long and needs to start doing something. He's a hawk. Janet Yellen has been, saying there are no interest rates hikes coming, maybe even this year. Do you think he's going to have any influence this week? And do you think any of these economic numbers may push the Fed to do something earlier?
No, I don't think so. I think, we're looking at a statement that's probably going to be a tiny bit more hawkish, but I think the risk factors are going to be signaled out. And one of the greatest concerns that I have, and I think it's going to be noted in the Fed statement, is the Russian sanctions and what that means for a further slowdown in Euroland. So, I think the Fed needs to be quite concerned about that. And of course, the geopolitical problems, that's certainly not helping.
What will that impact be if there's a slowdown in Europe regarding the United States? Because we've been kind of moving in separate directions for some time.
Absolutely. And the problem here is going to be, trade. And if you have if the fragile recovery that we're seeing now in the Eurozone should weaken, then obviously that's going to mean less trade for us, and that's going to weaken perhaps our manufacturing, our exports.
Finally, the jobs number, which comes out Friday, and that is really a key number that the Fed is looking at. And they've kind of removed their target number, so we don't keep referring to it. But where do you see jobs coming in at, and what impact might that have?
We're looking for 256,000 in non-farms, and probably the total unemployment rate ticking down to 6%. But again, most of the jobs will probably reflect hiring in the temporary market, and most of it also probably due to the summer needs that usually we see a swell up in hiring. But again, I think the key to this week's number will be perhaps the average work week. And
how much time people put in.
Exactly. And, of course, salaries. So I don't see any wage pressures, and that's the key for the Federal Reserve to keep rates low.
All right, Peter, well, busy week for you, right? A lot of things to look at.
A lot.
Peter Cardillo, thank you so much. We'll have you back soon to talk about it.
Thank you.
The president of France saying Monday that Europe and the U.S. will push ahead on new sanctions against Russia over the fighting in Ukraine and the fallout from the downing of the Malaysian Airjet. To date, sanctions have targeted Russia's elite oligarchs, and there are reports that cracks between them and President Putin may be showing. Will economic self-interest do in Putin's nationalistic policies? Gabriel Borenstein is the managing director of Enclave Capital, and he joins us here on Arise Exchange. Gabe, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let me start by asking you, do you think there's anything to these news reports that the oligarchs are starting to get a little bit nervous about Putin's policies?
There is no doubt that there must be a dialogue between oligarchs and Mr. Putin, but I don't believe for 1 minute that overt and profiled pressure will be exerted on Mr. Putin. Amongst oligarchs, you have people such as Mr. Abramovich, who have been working with Mr. Putin for many, many years. And certainly, Mr. Putin, not only oligarchs, are aware of the economic data, which reflects basically Russian economy flat as of June. The Central Bank of Russia was compelled to raise their main rates to 8%. These days, not too many economies can withstand that level of rates. But I do believe that behind the scene, there's a very logical dialogue between oligarchs and Mr. Putin, focusing on the potential implication of additional sanctions against Russia. No doubt in my mind that if the sanctions are anywhere within the parameters that are being discussed, Russian economy could basically take a major dive, perhaps comparable of what we witnessed in 2018 in the U.S.
From what you know, what kind of influence do the oligarchs have? I imagine Putin owes his office to some extent to the oligarchs. This is a country that has become, I mean, some call it a criminal enterprise. It's a big corporation these days, right? So
yes.
It's not the Soviet Union of the past when ideology dominated.
Just as much as Mr. Putin owes oligarchs his stability and popularity, the oligarchs in Russia currently owe their business success to the close relationship with Mr. Putin. So unfortunately, it's a two-way street. So again, no doubt there are discussions, serious discussions with Mr. Putin about severe economic implications stemming from the contemplated additional sanctions. But again, I believe all of this will be resolved behind highly profiled media headlines.
Right, okay, so it won't be out there in the public, you don't think. You know, you mentioned the close relationship and how the oligarchs have benefited from Putin. When the oligarchs kind of go their own separate way, we see what happens as well. In The Hague, in an arbitration case, just made a $50 billion ruling against Russia over their takedown of a company called Yukos, and of course the jailing of the CEO and the founder of Yukos, who was seen as a rising star in the political world of Russia. The first question is are the shareholders of that company going to see any of those $50 billion?
My impression is initially probably not. At first, I believe the U.S., the West, meaning EU, has to gain credibility with the Russian side, meaning we need to implement, as discussed in the headlines, the additional sanctions which will inflict economic pain on Russia. When we are treated seriously by the Russian side, then some sort of a settlement based on a verdict in Hague is possible. I don't believe for 1 minute that Russia, Mr. Putin, will write a $50 billion checks. However, the claimants have access to assets in the West, right? Rosneft, Gazprom. So there are ways to be partially compensated. Ultimately, I believe once the West gains credibility in terms of their redress of what's going on in Ukraine, then there will be a room to negotiate Hague's decisions.
Okay, Gabe Borenstein, Managing Director of Enclave Capital. Please come back soon as this development continues to unfold.
Thank you for inviting me.
Coming up, a new investment lifeline for developing countries, how it is creating a big boost in employment for these economies. Our Rise Exchange comes back. Last week on a Rise Exchange, is it economic treason to move headquarters for better tax treatment?
This is about enabling American companies to compete on a level playing field.
We all like to post photos of ourselves on Facebook. Perhaps it's best not to post a picture of yourself wearing the dress you stole. Me worry? That is the message from the U.S. stock market as global tensions are overshadowed.
Yes, headline on Ukraine, but where's it going to fall to the bottom line?
Watch this week for more. A Rise Exchange.
I don't think the television news in the United States reflects the diversity of the world. I don't think it does a great job of even reflecting the diversity of the United States.
When you are watching TV, you don't really see a lot of different cultures. There are plenty of other places that people might not even know about.
We are living in a global culture, and you cannot hide news that is happening when there's so much social media.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
When private groups make loans to emerging markets, they need somebody to absorb the risk that comes with those loans. That's the job of MIGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which is part of the World Bank. MIGA makes it possible for private investment in developing markets. Last week, MIGA announced a record $2.2 billion in new insurance. Those monies will spark an additional $2.6 billion of investment. This will create 7,500 jobs in the process from Cameroon to Honduras. Edith Quintrell is the operations director for MIGA, responsible for the agency's underwriting. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thank you very much. Great to be here with you.
Just a little brief overview, because few people have heard of this probably in the United States. In a synopsis, what does MIGA do?
MIGA is part of the World Bank Group, and our mandate is to support cross-border foreign investments into developing countries. It's a way of getting more private investments into these developing countries so we can help stimulate growth, create jobs, and ultimately bring down poverty in these countries. MIGA provides a product that covers political risks, so it helps investors, could be U.S. investors or investors based in other countries as well, manage all types of political risks associated with investing outside of their home countries.
And that's the key. It manages political risk, not necessarily bad investment decisions, right?
Correct. We don't cover commercial risks associated with doing those projects. Those are the risks that are better handled by the investors themselves. What we do is help mitigate political risks, like the risk that the government might take an action against the project and expropriate the project or interfere with the project, or the risk that you could have a war breaking out in the country sometime in the future that would damage the project, or breach of contract, which is very important in infrastructure projects. That's the risk that the government in the future changes the rules of the game and breaches its obligations.
It's basically ensuring a rule of law.
Correct. It could be a rule of law. It could be some other adverse action by the government that has the effect of taking that investment, taking the rights of the investor that they had in that project.
Why MIGA is having such a terrific year, up 13%? Why? What's driving it?
I think there's two reasons. One is investors are obviously, I think, much more concerned about risks. If you look around what's happening in the world, there's uncertainty in many regions, Middle East. Obviously, we have the current situation in Ukraine. There are pockets of uncertainty in Africa as well. So investors are much more aware of these risks, and they want to mitigate them, and they've become more sophisticated about the instruments that are out there. The second reason is I think we have new products that are more relevant now. We not only have political risk insurance, but we also have something called credit enhancement, which can be used particularly to support financing for projects. And that's very important because many of the commercial banks now are very constrained in terms of how much they can lend and for how long. So I think it's both our new products as well as what's happening in the global environment.
And is it easy for you to vet sort of the backstopping of these loans? I mean, so if you're a private investment group making these investments, what kind of processes do they have to go through to get MIGA's backing?
Great question. The first step is really to contact us, and they can do that early on to see if it's a project that MIGA could get involved in. We, as part of the World Bank Group, have certain standards that we need to meet. And then the second is once we can establish that, we have a process where we go and we look at the financial viability of the project. We also look at the environmental and social impacts of the project. And ultimately, we execute a contract with that investor. It can be fairly quick. I've seen projects done in 2 months, which is a record for MIGA. I've seen other projects obviously take longer, but usually that's because the parties to the project are still negotiating.
Is there any deal from last year that stands out as the best example of the difference MIGA can make?
I think a great example is a really benchmark transaction for us, which was a capital markets issue. So the first time that we did something in the capital markets using this credit enhancement product for the Hungary Exim Bank. It's a project that's going to allow Hungary Exim Bank to provide more financing to small and medium-sized enterprises in Hungary. It was done at a time when Hungary was going through some challenges economically, and this really enabled them to borrow long-term in the international capital markets with MIGA's guarantee.
Okay, Edith Quintrell from MIGA, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have you back on soon. Time now for our business ticker stories making headlines across the nation and around the world. Dollar Tree says it's buying rival Family Dollar for a lot of dollars. A total of $8.5 billion in cash and stock. You can't get that in one of their stores. The deal will make Dollar Tree the biggest discount retailer in the U.S. Together, the two companies will have more than 13,000 stores in 48 states and Canada. Hilton Hotels is rolling out a high-tech plan to boost its hotel chains. The company says it's invested about $550 million in new technology that will allow guests to use their smartphones to check in and unlock their doors. No more losing that little card key. The Hilton says the new upgrades will begin at the end of the year. On the road this summer, well, the pain at the pump just got a little bit better. That's because the average price for a gallon of gasoline in the U.S. dropped by 9 cents in the last 2 weeks and now costs an average of $3.58 per gallon. And Virgin America, the airline partly owned by British billionaire Richard Branson, has filed for an initial public offering amidst the recovering market. Branson owns a 22% stake in Virgin America, which offers flights to about 22 cities in the U.S. and Mexico. Ahead, why making a spreadsheet of when you don't have sex with your wife could make you our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arise Exchange.
Looking at mainstream news stations where only you have a very small minority of people of color being newscasters and actually having prominent roles in the media.
In a newsroom in the United States, maybe 10% of decision makers come from communities of diversity. That's not right.
Well, diversity is important because the more complete the news is, the more accurate a picture you're getting of the world, and the more you can form an accurate opinion of things.
The vision here is not just to tell the main stories of the day, but to tell the news that other organizations don't tell, and tell it in a way that people like me, people that look like me, that look like you, are interested in.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention, and not for the right reasons. Today, it is a man who created an Excel spreadsheet to document all the times his wife denied him sex, and his wife, who uploaded the spreadsheet to the social media site Reddit. The unidentified man emailed his wife the spreadsheet as she prepared to leave on a 10-day business trip. The data-obsessed and sex-starved husband noted dates they did and did not have sex, and the excuses his wife gave if she turned him down. For example, on June 3rd, 2014, no sex. The excuse? Watching a rerun of Friends. June 11th, no sex. The excuse? I'm still a bit tired from yesterday. July 3rd, no sex. The excuse? I'm too sweaty. The wife, who goes by the Reddit name Throwaway29, then shared the spreadsheet with the world by posting it online and responding. She said they used to have sex 3 to 5 times a week, but she wants it in the morning, but he's never awake. For the record, they did have sex 3 times over 27 days. Some would say that's okay. And the website Gawker complimented the husband for his Excel spreadsheet prowess, noting that he italicized the dates that he did, in fact, score. No word if the husband kept a separate spreadsheet detailing how the sex was, but we hope not. And so the two are our favorite couple of the day. Next, the 3-day work week and why it might be a good idea for everyone, and maybe your sex life at home. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms, just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs, or they got pregnant at an early age. And I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
On Arise Review, we take an in-depth look at the week's top stories. You'll hear from some of the best analysts in the world on a wide range of topics. Here are some highlights from our last show.
Any ceasefire, any lasting truce, as with any diplomatic agreement, has to give both parties something.
This upcycling trend is a little bit more recent, and I think especially with the ocean waste that we're seeing that's being incorporated into this collection, this is a fascinating new innovation and a great use for ocean waste plastic.
This split ruling gives the GOP another day to fight.
And when you take this split ruling along with the Hobby Lobby case, it doesn't bode well, I think, for the Obama administration. And the question becomes, could Obamacare lose? Could it be like death by 1,000 cuts?
I'm Julian Phillips. Catch a Rise Review every Sunday at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 1500 GMT, only on Arise News.
Three days on, 4 days off? Sounds good, huh? Well, this idea of a shortened work week has been a hot topic of discussion after Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim made the suggestion recently. In exchange for the shortened week, Slim says workers would need to put in 11-hour days and forget retiring at 60, more like 70 or 75. Could this be something that employers implement in the near future? Ann Weisberg is Senior Vice President at the Families and Work Institute and has some thoughts on this. Welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thank you.
What is driving this idea of a 3-day work week when all we know for as long as we've been around is 5 days? And by the way, that's a U.S. thing. There are countries where people work 6 days a week.
Right. I think what's driving it is that people need to work differently. And companies actually need the work to be done differently. Mm-hmm. So, the 50s model of 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, and that's it, doesn't really work for either organizations or individuals anymore.
And it doesn't work anymore because there's no such thing as just being at work for 8 hours,
exactly.
Right? I mean, you're tied to your job all the time.
Right. So work has changed, and that's a big part of it. Work is 24/7. We're on global teams. People are in different time zones. So to say we're only going to work 8 hours and these, from 9 to 5 doesn't make sense. And people's lives have changed, right? And technology has enabled us to work differently. So why don't we let people do, work when and where and how they can?
And because it's about getting the job done, not punching the clock. And by the way, the federal government has implemented 4-day work weeks for many of its employees, 10-hour days. You were telling me, because we had talked about Richard Branson earlier in the show, you told me that he sort of commented on this.
Yes, he did. And he said exactly that when you let people work when and where they want to, you actually get better results. And it's all about results. I mean, that's what it should be.
Now, I have to show up and do this job every day, but what kind of industries do you think would lend themselves to a 3-day work week?
Well, I think a lot of different jobs, and we have this When Work Works award, and companies when work works,
okay,
right? So when work works for both the employee and the employer, right? It has to work for both, and many of those companies, award-winning companies, have implemented compressed work weeks. 4 days a week, but 10-hour days, all kinds of different scheduling options for their people, and they're in a range of industries. So unless you have to be on location, as you do,
And we should say this is more than just about morale for the employees. For the employers, this frees up key infrastructure space, doesn't it, within offices and buildings and technology?
Absolutely. And a lot of big companies like Citi has this huge alternative workspace and workforce options program, exactly for that reason, for real estate costs, to manage that better and to manage the work better. I mean, that's the key here, is that work has changed. So some of our award-winning companies do this because they're 24/7, so they need people to work later in the day or even earlier in the day, and those shifts are different.
And the fact is on many levels, on a professional level, you're putting in more than 8 hours a day anyway.
Right.
And so this is giving you a little bit more flexibility.
Right, and that's the key.
When a company comes to you and you advise them, how do you help, if you do, craft sort of a plan for them and implement it? Because it is such a change in culture for so many companies.
Right, it's a huge change in mindset. And so we start with the facts, right? So what does your work look like? What does your workforce look like? What do they need? I mean, I think the proposal really was as much about the aging workforce and longevity, that people are working longer and longer, and a lot of countries, especially in Europe with an aging population, need people to stay in the workforce longer. So every company is different in terms of what it needs, but we try to help them.
We have about 30 seconds left. How do employees react? Do employees want a different work schedule? Are they able to adjust to that? And is there a demographic that's able to adjust better? I mean, are younger people more willing to have flexible hours?
I think that's a great question, and I think it really is universal. across all generations. Older workers want more flexibility because, they're nearing that stage where they may want to work differently. Younger workers also want to work differently. Everybody wants it.
Okay. Ann Weisberg, Senior Vice President with Families and Work Institute. A fascinating topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
And ahead this week on Arise Xchange, we'll explore why creating that $1 million smile has become big business for cosmetic dentists. A lot of economic data this week. We will be here to give it to you all. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Xchange.